Here's a look at today's assignment, which is on finding common denominators for adding and subtracting fractions. Learning targets are: I can find a common denominator when adding and subtracting fractions, and I can add and subtract fractions. The first slide is a note slide, and it just kind of tells you how to add and subtract fractions. It says to add and subtract two fractions that are written with the same denominator, which is the bottom number, you simply add or subtract the numerators, or the top numbers. So for example, 1/5 plus 2/5 is equal to 3/5. Because the denominator is the same and they both have 5, all you have to do is add the top numbers, 1 and 2, which equals 3, and your denominator would stay 5. So all you're doing is adding or subtracting the numerator, or the top number. If the fractions have different denominators, you have to rewrite them first as fractions with the same denominator. One way to do this is to use a giant 1, like we have been practicing. Below are examples of adding and subtracting two fractions with different denominators. So here is our addition example. We are adding 1/5 plus 2/3. So we want to have a common denominator. We need a common bottom number. So we need to find a number that 5 and 3 both go into. If I were to multiply 5 times 3, I would get 15. So 15 could be my common denominator. So in this giant one, I'm doing 5 times 3, which means I also have to multiply my numerator by 3, so 1 times 3, and that brings me to 3/5. The second one, I would do 3 times 5 to get to 15, which means I also have to take my numerator and multiply that by 5. 2 times 5 is 10. So now we come up with 3/15 plus 10/15, which equals 13 over 15, because I added the 3 and the 10. The subtraction example, 5/6 minus 1/4. So I could do 6 times 4 to get 24 as my common denominator, but there's actually another number that's smaller that they both go into. They both go into 12. So we can use 12 as our common denominator. So 5/6, I would multiply 6 times 2 to get to 12, which means I'm also going to multiply 5 times 2, which equals 10. So 10/12 is my first one. And then I would multiply 4 times 3 to get to 12, which means I also have to multiply 1 times 3. I always do the same to my numerator, which would be 3. So now I get 10 over 12 minus 3 over 12. And I'm going to subtract the 10 minus the 3, which brings me 7. So 7 over 12 is my answer. And this last slide is the one that you would have to fill out. So it says solve these problems. First find common denominators and then use the giant 1 to form equivalent fractions. Remember to multiply the fractions by the giant 1 if needed to get common denominators. So you have to make sure your denominator is the same. The first one is 5/12 plus 1/3. So I know that I have to find a common denominator. I can't just do 5 plus 1. And 3 goes into 12. So you can use 12 as your common denominator. You don't have to change the first one, but you do have to change the second. So 3 times 4 would equal 12. So I also have to do 1 times 4. So that would replace this right here. And then I end up with 5 plus 4, which equals 9. 9/12 would be your answer. For the second one, 4/5 minus 3/4, you could use 20 as your common denominator. 5 times 4 equals 20, so you also have to do 4 times 4. And then you would do 4 times 5 equals 20, so you also have to do 3 times 5, which would go in the second one, and then you just subtract the numerators to get your answer. And then down here, 1/3 plus 1/2, you'll have to find what your common denominator would be. Put that denominator in. Whatever you multiplied the bottom by, you also have to multiply the top by. You're going to add the top numbers, and same for the bottom. 5/6 minus 3/8. find your common denominator, do that same work to your numerator, and then subtract the top numbers.